first question is, where do you sit overall in your opinions of this live action version? So like if we had a scale where it was terrible, enjoyable is in the middle, and then over here is like fantastic, I guess you could put the original series over here. Where on that scale do you sit?
Okay. So if you're asking me to just look at it as a piece of media, point blank.
Yeah, the whole season.
I think IMDb's rating is pretty fair, of a 7 to a 7.5. If you're asking me to compare it solely to how well it measures up to its source material, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series, maybe closer to a 6 or 5.
Yeah, we've done a bunch of Avatar: The Last Airbender episodes, and I'll be sure to link them down in the description below so you can go check them out. We've done different debates of the best element. We've done, like you mentioned earlier, a character study of Zuko, and we also did like a power rankings and stuff like that. So I'll be sure to link them down below. But on a lot of those episodes, we get a lot of comments from the Avatar community. So let us know, what did you think of this live action series? Welcome to Backseat Directing,
Where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
we're your hosts,
Andrew.
and Aaron.
We put out new episodes every Monday and Thursday.
And on this episode, we're reviewing Avatar: The Last Airbender from Netflix.
3, 2, 1, action.
ATLA is one of the highest regarded TV shows out there. The fan base is so dedicated to the source material.
And we love it to death. We've covered a bunch of times here on the show, some of our most popular episodes, and that's why we're here today to talk about M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender. I'm excited to talk about
So many people just clicked off. Why would you do something like that?
Are we not covering The Last Airbender?
Not the movie,
Dude, I watched the wrong thing.
but
I watched
the show.
I prepared
The
by
show.
watching the movie.
This is gonna be a rough episode, guys.
Oh, there's a Netflix show?
I heard the movie was really good. I hope the show can live up to the movie.
The movie was it was good. It
Yeah.
was good. I watched it last night. It was as the people of the Fire Nation say, fire.
So it took you less time to study up for this episode than it took me, because mine was about 8 hours of content.
Yeah, I've been practicing pronouncing Aang's name.
Aang's name, that was solid.
Yeah, it took a while. I used to think it was Aang.
No. That's a common misconception.
I watched 3 seasons of the show, and they said Aang the whole time, but
Wrong. Yeah.
wrong, Aang. That's more of the sound.
All right. So Netflix, 2 or 3 years ago, announced that they were going and making a live action show. And the plan was 3 seasons, just like the original, covering each book. But there's a lot of, I think people were kind of split down the middle, 50% of the people were all for it, super excited, and 50% of the people are probably more on the hesitated side where they're, I don't know about this because the movie wasn't that good. How are they going to adapt the story? Is it going to be a 1-for-1? And then as more information came out, we found out that it's not going to be a 1-for-1.
Yeah, so the original Avatar, like Aaron mentioned, is broken up into 3 seasons. Avatar: The Last Airbender, one of the most popular shows, one of the most beloved shows, came from Nickelodeon. The first 2 seasons each had 20 episodes animated, probably around 20, 22 minutes each. And then the 3rd season had 21 episodes. And then when we get this new live action show from Netflix, it's the announcement that we're going to get 8-episode season. So a lot of condensing has to be done here. That's going to be one of the key elements of my critiques here. And just to give broad strokes, I have a lot of good things to say about this season, and I have a lot of complaints as well. I think that they got the job done. I think that it's not a disaster, and I think there's a lot of good to be mined out of the show. Comparison to Avatar: The Last Airbender is like comparing your painting to the Mona Lisa. It's like taking one of the best pieces of storytelling you've ever seen, and comparing it. So even though this is doomed to that when they decided to do it, because it's a remake of a live action remake of the show, it's doomed to that comparison. It's it was never going to measure up. And I don't think anybody in their right mind was sitting here thinking this is going to be as good or better than Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series. Am I wrong?
No, absolutely not. This is one of those projects. I was talking with Jordan, who was actually on our show, our last episode that I think is coming out after this one. But I was talking with him about how this is one project that I would not want to be on, whether involved in making it in any capacity, because it doesn't seem like there's any possible way that you can win.
But it's the same. It's honestly the same thing when it comes to a lot of these franchises: Star Wars, Marvel, DC. It's like you're never going to please everyone, and more likely than not, a huge percentage of them are going to be disappointed because people love Batman to death, love Spider-Man to death, love Anakin Skywalker to death. They are going to find something to nitpick, find something to critique, and like it's just what your brain does when you love something is you want it to be just right, just so. And I find myself doing it with Batman, even to a degree where it's not necessarily something that's gotten wrong about the character, but it's something that is not my favorite version of the character. They didn't do it the way my favorite version of the character does it. You know, I love the Arkham Batman. I love Batman Under the Red Hood. And maybe they took a different approach. So sometimes I have to settle myself back into like, yeah, I still like this. It's still good. It's not my favorite version of it. Like, this isn't my favorite version of Aang. This isn't my favorite version of any of these characters, you know, but
Doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable.
doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. Doesn't mean I didn't still like it.
Yeah. Like one difference between like a character like Batman or Spider-Man, like you brought up, and Avatar: The Last Airbender is that there's only really one version of that story. You know, I mean, yeah, we have the movie, but we don't really count that. So like to do a remake of that, there's a lot of pressure. You know, a lot of times with like Batman and Spider-Man and all them, you're telling different stories, you know? And yeah, you're changing the character a little bit, but this we're telling the story that everyone loves so much.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to do it justice?
And that's where I want to give them props is in the transition from 20 episode season, book 1 water, to 8 episode season. I think there were some areas where conceptually they just did a magnificent job of blending multiple stories into one, maybe stories that were in a different location or in a different time period. And I don't think it always worked, but I think in cases like bringing Jet and the Freedom Fighters to Omashu, I think that played brilliantly. Bringing Sai and Teo from the Air Temple to Omashu, I think that played brilliantly. It found a way to bring these people into a story without us literally whipping on a roller coaster ride of locations, you know, spending 10 minutes with Teo and Sai and then whipping us to Omashu and then to this little village where the Freedom Fighters are flooding a canyon. Condensing them all together and doing so somewhat seamlessly, where the Jet storyline plays with Katara, where it's most prominent in the animated series. Sai's story is with Sokka, where it's most prominent in the series. Aang's story is with Bumi, where it's also most prominent. So they blended those three in that episode really well. And then they did the same thing with Zuko. They had Zuko's journey where he's searching for Uncle Iroh because he's been captured by Earthbender soldiers. That's blended into Omashu instead of being, you know, out in the open Earth Kingdom where it was in the original animated series. And then Zuko also has to make that decision, right, where he sees the Avatar overhead, or he sees a path towards the Avatar versus the path to save his Uncle Iroh, and he chooses Iroh. So maybe in some areas, like, again, that comparison bias, you compare it to the show, that character development is definitely not as strong. It's not felt as overwhelmingly. It doesn't hit as hard because we haven't spent as much time in the series, the 8 episode series, seeing Zuko hunting the Avatar. I must capture the Avatar. I must, for my honor, I must. So we see that so much more sparingly in the live action show. So that decision isn't as impactful, but it's still brilliantly folded into a greater episode with multiple plot lines, with Aang, Sokka, Katara, and Zuko having different storylines, still brilliantly folded in there in a way that transitions it from the animated series to live action without like completely disregarding the storylines. It still keeps them in, even in a condensed format. So like those things for Zuko were all put into that same episode. I think that's commendable.
Yeah, they hit the big emotional beats throughout the whole series or season. And then I enjoyed the flashbacks and stuff too. Did you like how they like started 100 years ago and opened that way and then kind of periodically were flashing back in time?
I didn't like the way they opened it at the very beginning because it felt like a way to really get action in there quick, which I understand the necessity to do so because I feel like people quit on things really early nowadays. So I feel like they wanted to show us the bending, show us an action scene quick. So we got that Earthbender versus the Firebender scene. I didn't feel like that scene really added anything to the plot because immediately after that they went into showing us exactly what happened. They immediately went from I like maybe starting with Aang was a good choice. I like after that immediate opening we go to Aang and he's with the air nomads in the Southern Air Temple, but everything just got repeated to us from there. I mean, Fire Lord Sozin said, "Oh, my plan is to attack the airbenders." I'm like, they said that like 3 times in that opening scene, and then it got shown to us. So I feel like it was basically done for that reason of like showing us Fire Lord Sozin, showing us earthbending, firebending into some action. I feel like they could have cut that first part out.
So I have a few questions for you to kind of help guide this episode. My first question is, where do you sit overall in your opinions of this live action version? So like if we had a scale where it was terrible, enjoyable is in the middle, and then over here is like fantastic, I guess you could put the original series over here. Where on that scale do you sit?
Okay. So if you're asking me to just look at it as a piece of media, point blank.
Yeah, the whole season.
I think IMDb's rating is pretty fair of a 7 to a 7.5. If you're asking me to compare it solely to how well it measures up to its source material, Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series, maybe closer to a 6 or 5, which is still pretty commendable for how highly I regard that series.
So if we're on that
General scale.
Yeah, we're kind of towards
good.
past enjoyable, and we're on the right path here of getting to the actual series.
I think with the challenge they had, don't you think they did a remarkable job?
So me personally, I thought this was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I think the first episode, it took me a little while to kind of get into it. I think the first episode, I was like really judging it, wanting it to be what I wanted it to be.
And then you saw Aang flying and you were like, okay, this was good. This is good.
No, but then I said,
forget Guru Lahima. No, Aang is the one who flies.
Hey, he was falling in style.
Changing directions midair with no glider as well.
Yeah, that part, that would have been easy to keep the same. Right, he's just not able to fly. Like,
he didn't have to be flying in the South Pole too when he was calling for Appa. It was just unnecessarily.
That was even more so than the first one. At least the first one, he was falling in style.
Yeah.
That one, he was like flying up in the air. I would have rather him been on the scooter. We only got to see the air scooter once.
Also, like, we didn't get to see the penguin sliding. I've heard that complaint a lot. Which is a nitpick.
It's in the show for just a little bit, but the original.
The general complaint is that the fun isn't there, and I think that's kind of throughout the episode.
I hear that.
He has a lot more fun in he pushes Katara to go to this Fire Nation ship because he wants to explore. Like he's a lot more adventurous.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Isn't it weird how much more it seems we got in 20 episodes that are 20 minutes long than 8 episodes that are an hour long?
Because the episodes are basically 3 times as long.
Yeah.
So that's like most of the time.
Yeah, the time probably is pretty close to equal. It's just the structure of a live action show is a little bit different.
The live action show also spends a lot of time repeating itself with its exposition. Like they told the story of the fall of the 4 nations so many times. The grandmother retold it like a 3rd time after Sozin explained his plan. He showed it.
Pay homage to the original intro.
Then do that in the original opening instead of that really awkward looking animation they did with like the voiceover. That would like replace the original opening at the beginning of the first episode. That was bad. That was not enjoyable.
Okay, my next question is, what did you think of the acting and the casting choices of this show?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. I have IMDb pulled up here, so let me go over who is cast in the movie. Let's see. I want to get in here.
Again, this lot of pressure here in picking the right cast, picking the right actors to portray these characters, not only just their voice, but also physically. How are they performing? Are they able to match a cartoon, which is That's not easy to do in live action.
On top of that, they made an impressive and dedicated effort to cast a diverse group of people who were ethnically accurate to the groups that were imagined for
Yep.
the series, because the series is heavily Asia inspired in terms of the ethnicity of the characters. So that is a commendable, impressive, and they achieved what they set out to do. So,
Yeah.
round of applause there. Were deserved. So here's our cast for Avatar: The Last Airbender, the Netflix series. Gordon Cormier is Aang. And forgive me if I mispronounce any of these names. For lack of time for research, the series just came out like 2 or 3 days ago, and we had to watch it all. Kai Wintio as Katara, Aang Osli as Sokka, Dallas Liu is Prince Zuko, Paul Sun Hyung Lee as Uncle Iroh, Daniel Day Kim as Fire Lord Ozai, Matthew Yang King as Appa and Momo, Ken Young as Commander Zhao, Roy Iskander as Lieutenant Ji, Elizabeth Yu as Azula, and Lim K. Siu as Gyatso, Utkarsh Ambudkar as King Bumi. That was a tough one for me. Amber Midthunder as Princess Yue. And we could go on and on and on all day, but I'll try not to spend too much.
I think that's the majority of the prominent cast members.
That's when you start to get down into people that are in 3 episodes or less. So I would say that I think that overarching, the casting did an incredible job. I want to touch on the people that I think really hit the nail on the head. I want to hear mine and I want to hear yours and maybe see if we have any overlap.
Yep.
So my absolute favorite casting and acting in the show is done by Fire Lord Ozai, Daniel Day Kim. I think that
He's probably the first on my list as well.
I think my favorite casting that feels really accurate is Jet. I think Jet looks the part, and I think the intonations of his voice are fantastically similar to the original character. And the emotional acting that he does talking about the loss of his family at the hands of the firebender is really, really good acting. And when Katara turns on him as well, like how upset he is, I think he did a phenomenal job in the episode Nomashu. Now, who else would I say is my favorite? I think the actors who play Mei and Ty Lee do a really good job of getting the voice right as well. Much less screen time than some of the actors, but I really appreciate when the characters find the soul. They find the soul of the character in the voice. And I feel like the two of them, without completely just doing impression or mimicry, like they found the character in the voice. Who are your favorites?
Right as Elizabeth Yu came on screen as Azula, I was like, oh, like she's Azula. Right. The first scene that we see her with, she says this line and then she has this little like evil smirk. And I was like, oh, that's just like the show. I thought she did a really good job as the character. We didn't get to see her really be Azula in terms of like interacting with any of the other main cast members of the Avatar gang just yet, because she's not in the original first season, right? Like this was an addition to this live action series. But I thought she did really good. Like you said, Fire Lord Ozai. And as the series developed, I really liked the relationship and dynamic between Uncle Iroh and Zuko.
I think that's actually my favorite relationship and dynamic in the show, which shouldn't be hard to believe because it's really the best relationship probably in the animated series as well. I'd be hard pressed to come up with one that I like more. Especially in the episode where we get Iroh's backstory with the loss of his son Liu Ten in the Siege of Ba Sing Se. That was hands down my favorite moment in the show when Zuko tells him it would be an honor for him to lose his son, and then stops, turns around, and comes back and God, it's just such a good character moment because he gives him the medal that Liu Ten gave him when he felt like he needed courage, and it's like good writing in my perspective because he says, this gave me strength when I needed it. And he doesn't say, maybe it'll give you strength too. But the implication is that, maybe what I just said was wrong. And maybe that's just what I think my father would want to hear. And I can acknowledge that it's not this wondrous thing for your son to be gone in battle. It's devastating. And then he goes on to sit right next to him and like bear the brunt of the burden of the that emotional moment, to sit in it with him. And it really shows the bond between the two characters. And like you see throughout the series later on, you see Iroh in episode 7 like thumbing that metal like when Zuko's boat blows up, like that relationship. And when Iroh says everything that I need on this is on this boat, like he lost a son and
All the
gained a
tea I
son.
need.
Dude, and plus, did you hear them playing Tears from the Vine in the funeral scene for Liu Ten?
I didn't recognize it, but I think Brooke said
Yeah.
something
When
about that.
Zuko is talking to him, it's playing Tears from the Vine like on like some strings.
Mhm.
Oh my god, dude. I was about ready to cry in that scene.
I think they hit a lot of the emotional beats of the original show.
They just hit it at a faster pace that I think dilutes the. That's where I said that I'm going to come back again to the comparison bias, because in the 8 episode format they hit it at a faster pace, and you can't sit in it as much. You can't develop as much of a relationship and a hatred towards Zuko to feel because the momentum is already shifting. You know, by the time he saves him from the archers and the prison as the blue spirit, that moment in the show I think is purely selfish, and it's mostly selfish too in the live action show, but it's when he wakes up and has this like heartfelt moment with Aang, as compared to the animated series where he wakes up and just Aang is talking, and as soon as Aang's finished talking, he shoots a blast of fire at him. Like he's on site with the Avatar even then. And so he's already started to soften to the Avatar, and I feel like they can already show him the wheels turning in his head. Like, this is a kid with a lot of weight on his shoulders, similar to the weight that I feel like I should grow up and be the Fire Lord. And it's a lot faster, you know. But like season 2 is the bulk of that turning point and emotional change for Zuko, and it happens over the length of 20 episodes fully. He's even turned back at the end of the time in Ba Sing Se after physically getting sick. And we've done a whole episode breaking down Zuko and why that transformation is so good. So I think rushing it is like the biggest, not the biggest mistake you could make, but it's a bad mistake for one of the best character transformations of all time. So it's a little bit of a loss there, but we still get these incredible character moments that you can see that he's a complicated character. I think the actor for Zuko is doing a great job.
He seems like he's doing a lot of his own flips and stuff, right? Didn't it look
It
like
looked
that?
like it.
Yeah.
If not, they hit it really well, because when the scene where he saves Uncle Iroh, I think it's probably the one you're thinking about, right? Because when they're fighting, what I wanted Iroh to do so bad in that part, dude. He has the locks, the bracelets on that iron bars, and in the animated series, he like asked them to adjust it, and the guy's like going to make them, or he says they're too loose to trick him into making it tighter, and then he like blows smoke or steam onto it, and then clamps the guy's hand down onto the chains. I wanted that so bad in the live action, but he doesn't do it.
So this is a good transition into my next question. What did you think of the bending?
I think that the bending looked really good. I just so I'll admit here. I think we maybe we'll have to do this from now on. If we don't watch something in its entirety, is to sit here and look at the camera and say I am a bad podcast host and I did not watch the last episode of the show yet.
You know, I was talking with some of my friends at the gym, and I was like, "Oh," they were like, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I was like, "Oh, I gotta watch this show, ATLA, before podcast, and I hope I'll have time to finish it all. I might be an episode or two short, but I know Andrew's got it, and
It's usually
the seats have turned, the tables have turned.
It's usually vice versa.
And I was able to watch it all, which is all because of my wife being very flexible and sitting down with me and watching it.
And I wasn't able to watch it because of my wife, my fiance.
But thank you so much to both of our spouses for letting us do this podcast.
Yeah, and for watching the show with us, what they did.
Yeah.
It's just the 7th episode. That's the point that I was trying to bring up. I just watched Katara's fight with Paku.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful adaptation of what they did in the show. They showed all the same moves. The discs, riding the wave, like the spikes. They got all the moves right. It looked great, especially the discs, which is like one of my favorite, coolest waterbending moves I've
How'd you
in my
do
show.
that?
Yeah, them all asking her how she did it. But like she raises this stack of ice water and then fires off like frisbees of ice. And they even did the slow motion part where Paku kind of like turns off to the side and you see his reflection in the ice.
Yeah.
So I can't complain about the bending. I thought it looked really good, other than Aang flying, which I thought look stupid.
It's more of a directional error,
It just,
you
well, it
know?
just looks awkward to the eyes, like you talk about with the movement in Thor: Love and Thunder.
Yeah, it becomes uncanny. Like
Yeah.
people don't move like that, even if they were not attached to anything, like they're jumping or flying or falling. That's just not the way that their body's physics work. Um, but I think other than the decision to make Aang fly, the bending looked phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think with when he's using the air bending and you see like all the leaves and like and the dust, like you can see the air. And I think that was a big question of like, what are they gonna do? Like, are they gonna show like white lines? Like, how do you show air? Air is invisible. And they did a great job of making it atmospheric.
Yeah. The show just made it blue. I mean, they
Yep.
had it easier in terms of anime
Right.
format.
Yeah, you can get away with things more in animation than you can in live action, obviously. But then the fire looked really good. I think one of the biggest complaints from the movie is that the elements didn't really interact with anything else that was going on. Like when a fireball is being thrown, it's not lighting up the area at all. And it's obviously this big source of light. And in this show, they did a really good job of that. Whenever there's fire, there is light being projected from that fire onto our characters, onto the backgrounds, or maybe the earth elements that it's clashing with.
Earth would come out of the ground and remain like present as a part of the environment. It wouldn't
Yep.
like just be a flat ground after they had affected the terrain.
And the water, too, like when Katara's bringing up the water and it's in that ball and there's like still like drops
Yeah.
slipping away from it rather than it just being all compact into
Attention
this
to detail,
sphere.
yeah.
I thought the elements looked fantastic. Um, they were so good. And one of our questions leading into this show when we did our reaction to the trailer was, how often are we going to see bending? Because we need to see it a lot.
Yeah.
We need to see it definitely every episode, definitely every sequence. Like bending is just a part of life. It's a part of their culture. They even say it in the show that like water bending is our culture. So how often were we going to see it? We saw it a lot.
Yeah, and we saw it in a lot of different unique ways too, similar to the show. I think we saw Aang use airbending to like get up off the ground, to like pop himself up.
Which
saw
is
all kinds of
super
stuff.
easy to avoid doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like could
Just
have
have him get
easily have just had him get up or, like just jump or whatever. But they actually made him get up like Aang would, where he's lifting himself up with air while he's laying down, and all the air comes up from under him and flings him up to his feet and he runs away. When him and Aang and Zuko were doing that battle, like between all of the fabrics and stuff, my wife was like, "Oh, this is like really cool." Them like running through the city and stuff, and it was fun. He could have been maybe a little more playful,
Yeah.
but I think it captured what the original is going for. It gave us the enough.
You can get down to the nitty gritty and complain about a lot of changes from the original series, like Aang not being as playful, or I think that there's a lot of small changes. Like I don't believe Yue is a waterbender in the animated series. They show her waterbend. I feel like some of the changes were done to kind of make things fit better in a shorter time frame. And for that, it's hard to complain about that. Like another good example of them like melding stories down together that I was thinking of is what they did with the Blue Spirit episode. What they did was they took the story where they go into the spirit, where Aang goes into the spirit world alone with Havai, and they combined it with the story where Sokka and Katara get sick and Aang gets captured by the archers. So they combined it really brilliantly, I think, by having Sokka, which, yeah, if you're an Avatar purist, like I feel like I am, and we are, I was annoyed that they brought Sokka and Katara into the spirit world. Because when that happened, Sierra was like, oh yeah, something that Tenzin worked for his entire life to be able to do just happened accidentally to Sokka and Katara with like some one-off line explaining how it happened. But it's frustrating, but I see why they did it in terms of overall plot. Because they got trapped in there. Aang went to go find a solution to get them out. He ended up getting captured by the Fire Nation. And then he's trying to escape from there to get back to save his friends instead of to get back and help his friends who are sick. How did you feel about the changes overall? Like there's a lot of changes you could get into. That's a big one, but there's a lot of granular ones. like changes like showing showing Azula in the first season, showing Ozai in the first season, showing Boomy as being like kind of uh, resentful towards Aang and angry at him for being gone for 100 years instead of just being this goofy, silly guy who's still kind of his friend in a lot of ways. How'd you feel about the changes? And which ones maybe bothered you, which ones didn't?
So I didn't grow up with this show like most of the fans of the show have, right? Because this show originally came out in 2010, if I'm remembering correctly.
I watched it in elementary school.
So yeah, that's 14 years ago. I watched it for the first time back in 2020. I've seen the whole series through one full time, and then I've gotten through, I think, season 2, a second rewatch.
No, 2005 to 2008.
Okay, so I was off. So it came out 20 years ago. And then I've read all of the comics pretty much. So I'm definitely a fan of the show, of the world, of the characters, but I also liked how they changed the story a little bit because I don't want to sit there and necessarily watch the same exact story that I've already seen. I want to see some new takes on it. Now that's risky, right? Because if it's changed, that's off too much from the original source material, a lot of people aren't going to like it. Like you said, Sierra wasn't a fan of some of the big changes. Me personally, I had a lot of fun with the show. So I don't think the changes really bothered me at all.
It didn't bother you that Aang was okay with Katara being left out of the fighting instead of supporting her and wanting to be a warrior like he did in the actual show? They didn't feel like that was off for Aang's character?
I feel like he wasn't really there at all when he was being talked. Are you talking about in the last episode?
Yeah, second to last episode.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like he wasn't there that much in the show. Like he wasn't like
in which show?
Or in the Netflix show.
She came to him and said that they wouldn't let her be a warrior, and he said that maybe they're right because he didn't want her out there. He was worried about her and Sokka getting hurt, so he wanted them like basically not at the front lines, which makes sense for a kid, but it's very different.
I don't hate it, right? Because he's gone through a lot of loss. He's already talked about a few times as the show's gone on about losing his best friends.
I like that they kept that present throughout the show. Like you could see when
he brought it up a bunch of times.
When she eats her favorite food that she said it tastes like home, you can see kind of a look on his face, like he does, like maybe he misses food from the Southern Air Temple, like he misses his culture, his people.
So, no, it didn't bother me that much because he's already had so much loss, and it's kind of been the theme of this whole show or this whole season of like, I am alone. I have to take this responsibility on my own. You know, all these other past avatars are telling me to take it on my own. Yeah, he hasn't matured yet to realize that he does need the team.
But he also says multiple times, like specifically in that episode, I made it this far because of my friends. Like we did this as a team. I want to do it. He's like, they're like, how have you done all these stories we've heard of when they talk to him on the ice wall? He's like, I did it with my friends. So like that specifically, you're right. That comes from him, that conversation he just had with Avatar Kuruk telling him he needs to do it on his own. But he was like defiantly against that at the end of that scene, and then like was wavering.
But it's hard because this like kind of mentor character who has gone through what you've gone through is telling you to do something opposite of what you've been doing. And it's like they have all of this experience. He's a 12-year-old boy, so it's hard. I can see that it could be hard for him to be like, no, I'm not going to take your advice, you know?
I feel like it's somewhat realistic, but it even though it's like realistic and it makes sense and he's a kid, that's a change that makes me like Aang less in this show. Because Aang was like, in the animated series, Aang was like, we're doing it my way. Like so much of the time. Like there was times when he lost hope and lost faith. Like he lost hope when they were going into Serpent's Pass. He lost hope when he failed and the world thought the Avatar was dead. But like, he always came back from that, and he always was wanted things like my favorite moment for him is refusing to kill Fire Lord Ozai, and I think that's probably the same for a lot of people. So I want that as part of Aang's character. Maybe that's just room for growth, like I'm sure you would say, like you always say with the Batman, is it's just room for character growth, which can be a good thing. But I like the way he was from the beginning in the animated series. One change that I will say, to cut back to a compliment, is the change that the 41st Regiment from the Fire Nation that was going to be sacrificed as pawns turned out to be used as the crew of Zuko's ship in exile.
Mm-hmm.
I love that change.
Yeah.
Because like when Iroh tells Lieutenant G that and he's like, do you ever think about how you guys ended up on this ship? It's like Zuko saved all of their lives by speaking out, and they're talking about his sacrifice. Like he sacrificed, you know, his face was burned. He lost his nation. He lost his family and went into exile. And in doing so, ended up saving all of their lives. I thought that was a really beautiful full circle moment that doesn't get mentioned in the animated series.
He also doesn't like hold it over them in any way either. Like they didn't know that Zuko saved his life.
He never tells them, which is, I think a lot has to do with like his honor. Like he does things because he thinks they're the right thing to do, even when he's doing the wrong thing. He's doing it because he thinks it's the right thing to do. He's misguided. He's young, and he has a lot of love for the Fire Nation. Like even when he snaps at Lieutenant G, he says it's not just because he's an asshole. It's because he's saying he's gossiping about a superior officer, like when he shouldn't be. He's trying to respect the chain of command. He's trying to live up to what he thinks his father would want him to be. It's not without reason. And I think Zuko's pretty well written throughout. He's the best written character, arguably, in the animated series. And I think he's well written throughout this. I really like that change. I do think like the show, in specifically in regards to the sacrifice comment, they do this thing where like they think you're absolved of any wrongdoing when people misjudge you, which isn't true. Like when G is like, he doesn't know anything about sacrifice, and Iroh's like, he knows more about sacrifice than you know. It's like, okay, just because he's sacrificed doesn't mean that he can be a jerk to everybody on the ship. He's still being just as much of a jerk. It's nice that he did that, you know, but it doesn't absolve him of being rude to all of them the way he is. And they do the same thing with other characters, like with Jet, and or what's the other big one? They say to somebody that they're like, oh, he doesn't know about sacrifice and he doesn't know about loss or something like that. But
is it the engineer guy?
The engineer Sai?
Yeah.
Says it about somebody?
Yeah.
I don't remember. But the being misjudged about what you've gone through or what you've had to sacrifice or your loss is just because you've had a hard time doesn't mean that you can give other people a hard time. And I feel like they do kind of paint that picture.
Okay, that's a fair argument. So we've talked about how we've liked the show overall. We went into the casting and the characters.
Changes.
We talked about changes and how the bending looked. What about the world itself and the animals and the locations? Like, how well did they capture the ATLA world to you?
I think when it comes to doing so much CGI, there are some limitations that bothered me. I think they did a lot of green screen work where, specifically, the first thing that comes to mind is the main square in Omashu. When you're like looking over these characters' shoulders, it's just like very apparent that the area behind them is not the actual background. It's a tarp that's being done with special effects. And that's not every moment in the show, but it's a lot of moments in the show. And that hurt the world building for me because it constantly reminded me that I was watching a TV show. But like I said during our trailer reaction, the wide shots I think are amazing. I think when it comes to doing so much CGI, as we learned from our friend and resident CGI expert, Dan Brown, who's on the screen over your shoulder, it makes it hard for you to do a lot of cool moving shots if the area around you is CGI, because it becomes it becomes exponentially harder to make that CGI look good when the camera is moving, because now you're having to give like the 3D element or motion to those objects in the background. So I think when they're doing the green screen work, there's a lot less camera movement. Like you mentioned the scene in Omashu where they're fighting with the laundry. Since the laundry is the main view of the shot, they can do some cool camera movement there. But then there's a lot of areas where they really can't without it looking really rough.
Even with all those limitations, and I agree with you, I think they did a really good job.
Yeah, I think
they did have a good way of displaying the scope of these cities that they're in, like you said, with the wide shots
of Omashu and the Northern Water Tribe.
Yeah,
they look really cool in the wild.
But even the close-up shots, like I know watching that it's not real, and I think that's, since we're in this world so much, we notice it even more than people who are just probably casually watching the show.
Sierra complained about it
But
a lot more than I did.
really,
A lot.
I don't know. I thought it looked really good.
She thought that she thinks the show looks really bad.
Yeah, I don't
Expectations.
think
We've talked a lot about how high expectations are now for CGI.
so. Yeah, they drastically have gone up in the last decade alone. Yeah. Let's see. What else can we? What's our next talking point here? Oh, what about the animals? How do you think the animals looked? Me personally, I think they looked so real. I think they looked fantastic.
I think they mostly look good. We disagreed about this. I don't like the way the bounty hunter's animal looks. I think for the most part he looks accurate, but I just think he looks really awkward when you see him on screen. Like something about the lighting and and its hair and the motion of its little tendrils on its snout. It looks very out of place to me and unreal next to real people. And that's just the nature of turning something animated into something live action, I think.
Yeah, I think for
Momo looks rough to me too. I think he looks creepy. And I also think
yeah,
Momo,
I don't think so.
my main complaint about the animals more so, because I do think Appa looks good, looks even really good sometimes. I think that the Badger moles looked cool. But my main complaint about the animals, namely Appa and Momo, is that they are not treated as main characters in Team Avatar. Team Avatar is Sokka, Katara, and Aang, and it should be those three plus Momo and Appa. They have a moment where Momo like throws some stuff at some enemies, which I thought was great, but it's a small moment in the grand scheme of the whole show. Appa does not get nearly enough love from Aang. I thought when Katara said, "I wouldn't have gone on this journey across the world if not for you," I thought it would have been a great moment for Aang to say, "And Appa," because you couldn't have traveled the world if not for Appa. Like in the show, what does he say in season 2 of the show where he's like, "Appa's always carrying you. He's carrying all your weight." Like Appa, Aang loves Appa. It's not just a pet; it's his spirit animal. It's like they have a special connection.
Yeah, he's treated more of a vehicle than a character or a pet or a friend, like you're saying. That's a fair critique, I think.
Like Aang, when he lands at the Southern Water Tribe, he does say like, make sure he gets lots of seaweed, which I also feel like Aang should have said please if it was. I feel like that's more of an Aang, but he's like hugging Appa goodbye when they part ways in the animated show. You know, it's like he's devastated when Appa is kidnapped. You put a muzzle on him,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, I that bond wasn't felt as much. But like I said, it's in when they cut it down to 8 episodes, there's going to be a lot of places to nitpick, and I feel like that's not the biggest problem in the world, to be fair.
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying there. I have one more question for you. And animation is kind of a love-hate medium. I think the people that are into it really enjoy the style, the storytelling, and then the people who aren't just can't get into it. It's not real. It's for kids. It's whatever that is that they say. Does this show do a good enough job to display the story to people who haven't seen the original? Like if I were to show, because the rest of my family hasn't seen this, if I were to show them this live action, because it's maybe an easier sell than an animated show that's on Nickelodeon, if I were to show them this and a live action, is it justifiable of the story?
I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm not going to mince words. And you know how I feel about this to some degree. I hate that idea. This show coming out has made me realize one thing overwhelmingly, and it is that I don't really want any live action remakes of animated things anymore for the posterity. And it's not because I hate this show. It's not because I think it's terrible or it does such a bad job of adapting. It's just watching it, I was like, this is good, but it is entirely unnecessary. It's great that it got people a chance to do something creatively. It gave a bunch of people work, you know, in the industry, but it's just they could have created something original instead. They could have spent their money. My fiance's big critique is she loves the show called Warrior Nun that got canceled, and there's all these shows that got canceled that could have had a chance at another season if that budget was allocated to Warrior Nun, or a show I loved, Santa Clarita Diet, that got canceled, other Netflix originals. And I just say to myself, why? I mean, if there's a person who doesn't like animation and can't appreciate animation, I guess you don't get to watch Avatar. I'm sorry. I don't need you to watch Avatar that badly that I need a gateway Avatar. Like, I don't need a watered down version of Avatar that is good but not quite as good to convince you to watch it. You should take the overwhelming love for this show as a sign that it is good and everyone loves it, and you should give it a shot. If you don't like it, you don't like it. I mean, some people have bad opinions, but that's just the way that the world is going to be. And there doesn't need to be another Avatar for people who don't appreciate anime. Stuff that's made to be animated originally, it was made that way for a reason. And especially, we talked about this with our friend Jay. Shout out Jay. He'll be watching this, I'm sure, in our Patreon, which you should also join. He mentioned Naruto's getting a live action adaptation, and it's just, this show has made me think, why? I love Naruto. I've never thought this needs to be live action. The thought of it is like, oh, if Invincible was in live action, it would be cool. I'd love to see John Hamm as Omni-Man, you know? Like, the concept is cool, but it is not necessary. Give me more seasons of Invincible. You know, I'll rewatch Naruto. I don't need a live action version of it. It's just not a necessity out there in the world. And I feel like it's just easy pickings when it comes to making something that, you know, everybody already loves. And, you know, maybe even if 10% of the original fan base of Naruto or Avatar tune in, then we've kind of got a hit on our hands because the original show is such a big hit. How do you feel about it? This is a tirade. I feel really strongly about this since watching this show.
I agree with you mostly. I think that people should just get over themselves and watch the first original Avatar: The Last Airbender cartoon, because, like you said, it's perfect. It's much better than the Netflix show, even though I personally think that the Netflix show does a good enough job of, hey, you should enjoy this story too. And this is a good enough representation of that story to maybe get you involved more into the characters in the world of ATLA. So if you haven't seen the animated show and you don't want to, I would still personally recommend this live action show as
since it already exists.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah. How do you think things are going to move forward? Because as far as I know, they haven't started filming season 2, which I think is the biggest mistake of the show, to not just film all 3 seasons back to back to back. Because, like, I feel like to greenlight a project like this, you should already just bite the bullet of, hey, we're making the whole thing. We're going to do this justice. We're going to release it every year for the next 3 years. But our characters are the appropriate age because we filmed over the course of 6 to 8 months or however long it takes to record 3 seasons, and we got it locked in. That's that.
It's very important to the original plot too that this all happens in a year, and I'm sure they'll just do the rewrite on that. But
I believe they are doing a time jump in season 2 if it gets approved, because I don't think it's greenlit yet.
The original story is specifically that Aang has to master all 4 elements and defeat the Fire Lord before Sozin's comet comes back around, because when that comes back around, Roku tells him that Fire Lord Ozai is going to use that to make the final push to conquest the entirety of the known world. So they're just not going to do that.
Yeah, it seems like if there is going to be a season 2 and 3, that it's going to change even more than the changes that season 1.
Yeah, like season 1 changes are acceptable. Like Wang Shitong shows up in the spirit world. That doesn't happen until season 2.
Right.
They show the fog of lost souls. That doesn't happen all the way until Legend of Korra. Fine. They Ko the Face Stealer. He doesn't they don't explain that he has to have a flat affect, and it doesn't happen when he's in the Northern Water Tribe. Instead, it happens when he goes into the spirit world after Heivai. Fine, not the end of the world, but they will have to make a pretty big plot change to make that make sense.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see how they do it. I definitely would give a season 2 a chance.
I think that's why they should have filmed it back to back, because people are going to watch it. People are going to tune in. If that's what you're worried about, viewership is fine. People are going to watch it. I'm sure, and 7.5 on IMDb is, I think they're considering this a success already. There's been a lot of haters online,
especially for a bunch of other Netflix shows that they put out. Yeah. I bet aren't anywhere close to a 7.5 that have multiple seasons. And I'm sure they also had a lot lower budgets than this, but still, you're already putting in this much time and effort. You might as well do it right and just do it all back to back. That's the biggest mistake I think that they've made. For the whole show, and that's not even something that we have seen yet. So It makes me a little worried some, like you said, of like how much is actually going to change.
But the future for Avatar, the universe overall, is really bright. We have all these things coming from Avatar Studios with in partnership with Nickelodeon, doing animated movies with the original creators. So I'm looking forward to all that.
And I believe a show too,
Yes,
following the next
Earth,
Earthbender.
yeah, the Earthbending Avatar.
So there is a lot of Avatar content that's coming out in the next 3 or 4 years.
So we're winning one
Yeah.
way or the other. We don't need the live action. Even if they decide not to go forward with season 2, we've got all that other content, and I'm looking forward to vastly more.
If anything, I just hope that the live action brings more attention to the animated series to grow it even further so they can just keep making animated versions of this story.
That's what the actress who plays Toph, voice actress who plays Toph, was saying. She was on a podcast saying that, like, not to sound Hollywood, but any press is good press. Like, people talking about Avatar. She said, anybody talking about something that I've been in is a good thing to me.
Right. And it being better than the movie that has come out. I'm sure that kind of press probably didn't help the people go to the animated show,
That I think that had to give confidence to the team when they were like, we just have to do better
Yeah.
than The Last Airbender by M. Night Shyamalan.
Exactly. Okay. I feel like this kind of wraps up everything about the episode or about the season 1.
Yep.
Did you have any other things that you wanted to mention?
No, I mean, this just covers our first thoughts. Like you mentioned, we may come back and do more coverage on this show because we're huge fans of Avatar.
Yeah.
If you're watching on camera, we've got it on the wall. It's something that
I'd
we
love to talk more about this. I'd love to maybe see if we can get Dan on the show to talk about some of the CGI, maybe point out some things that we missed, or explain things that we're doing a terrible job at doing.
I totally forgot when you asked about the actors, and I said people who I thought hit the nail on the head. I wanted to talk to you about Monkey Atsu because I thought Monkey Atsu was great, but did you say he wasn't your favorite?
He wasn't my favorite, but I enjoyed his aspect of the show.
I feel like he nailed the Monkey Atsu laugh
Yeah.
so well. Like,
Yeah.
like he did it so well.
I thought he did a good job as the character. For me, I just had a hard time getting past his mustache. It looked like it was just glued onto his face.
I felt that initially when I first saw him as well.
That and the hair for the... I'm so bad with names. I'm sorry. The moon spirit
Yue.
lady. Yeah. Her hair also looked like it was just
A wig.
pasted onto
There's
her head.
a lot of wigs in the show. A lot of wigs.
There was, but I feel like some passed more than others.
The Freedom Fighters were so good, weren't they? They got all of them. They got Pipsqueak, Longshot, Smellerbee. Like they all look good along with Jet.
Agreed. Yeah, we just didn't get a ton of time with them, which is okay.
We got to see Longshot do that sniper shot from the weeds.
That was cool. We got to see a lot of cool things. I also like the emotional impact that the guard, the earthbending guard.
Oh, wow. He was a
Iroh.
good actor, wasn't
And
he?
he reminded me of John Berthold for some reason.
Oh.
But he was explaining, like he was being mean to Iroh when he was under captivity. And at first you're like, oh, like he's just being mean to his prisoner. But then he reveals that it's even more personal than that he ended up killing someone that was really close to him. Was it his brother? Or
his little brother.
Yeah,
because his brother
who was 19, who was at the forefront of the battle that Iroh led their charge
They
for.
torched the wall of Ba Sing Se and he died. Yeah, I mean, and Iroh, honestly, the writing, I did not like Iroh's reaction to that. Didn't feel like Iroh. You could tell with the acting that, he had inner turmoil about what had happened and he had inner guilt, but his response was really cavalier. It was like, it was war. We all did things that we regret. It's like, it's not him owning up to anything that I don't know. I feel like Iroh really, in the animated series, regretted everything he did at Ba Sing Se. Like he said he had a vision of coming back to retake Ba Sing Se, and he had to, like, I feel like that weighed heavy on his soul, especially like after the loss of his son. Hearing about the loss of this guy's brother, I feel like would have racked him with guilt. So I feel like I just didn't like his verbal response in that moment. But the guy and holding the rock over his head and everything, and such a good character moment all around when the fellow soldiers came and like pushed him away from doing that. They're like, oh, you can't kill this like defenseless looking old man. It's like, it's real. Like these people, like these average earthbenders aren't like murderous. They wouldn't just stand back and watch him do that. And he's probably not a murderous guy himself, just pushed to the edge by
Emotion.
Iroh's comments, and
Yeah.
yeah, so they were these little side characters, so well written and well rounded in that moment in the show. Like his like teary-eyed, divulgence of the loss of his brother, I thought was just so well performed. Interestingly written, not only in terms of the dialogue, but in terms of like the situation that they created, with him versus Iroh and that position that he was in to unveil Iroh's backstory, even in a way too. So
Yep.
that was a great scene. I'm glad you brought that scene up. It was some really good side actors. I thought Danny Pudi did a really good job as Sai as well. He's from Community.
Yeah, we've done a bunch of Avatar: The Last Airbender episodes, and I'll be sure to link them down in the description below so you can go check them out. We've done different debates of the best element. We've done, like you mentioned earlier, a character study of Zuko, and we also did like a power rankings and stuff like that. So I'll be sure to link them down below. But on a lot of those episodes, we get a lot of comments from the Avatar community. So let us know, what did you think of this live action series? Did it do the original show justice? Was it good enough to pass, or was it unnecessary and didn't hold up to the standard that the original animated show has set? Are you looking forward to any other Avatar content that are coming up? I want to know what your favorite and least favorite parts are of this series.
That's a great way to invite people into the conversation, which is always something that we're trying to do. We, like I mentioned earlier, if you missed it, we have a Discord. Check it out. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. You don't want to miss any of these videos. We do episodes. We do. We do put out episodes every Monday and Thursday, but sometimes we put out extra ones. So if you hit that notification bell, you won't miss any of those extra episodes. And we post short version content. We post shorts, TikToks, Instagram Reels. So make sure to check us out on all of our social media platforms so that you are up to date with all of this super fun stuff. We really appreciate anyone, especially watching, who stuck around to this point. It means a lot.
Yes, thank you so much.
We hope you'll stick along with this ride for us. And that's a wrap.